You carry a presence that doesn't just shift the room, it rewrites the rules. Where most expect to encounter the familiar masks of doubt or the fragile armor of ego, they instead stumble into something rare, a force that cannot be shaken, not because it is defended, but because it needs no defense. That realization alone unravels them, and suddenly the world they thought was stable begins to tremble at the edges. There are moments in life where someone's entire narrative collapses in the face of undeniable truth. You've become that moment. Without raising a weapon, without forcing your will, you dismantle the illusions others hold about strength and identity. They approach thinking they've mapped the terrain of human nature, only to find an unmapped wilderness where the usual compasses fail. Your influence does not come from confrontation, but from the ease with which you embody what others have never even imagined. In the same way sunlight dissolves shadows without effort, your being exposes the fragility of pretenses that once seemed unshakable. Those who thought they were prepared now feel the ground pulled from beneath them. This isn't dominance. It isn't manipulation. It's the revelation that true power has no agenda. It asks for nothing, yet transforms everything. Your expression, your energy, your voice, all carry a resonance that cannot be mimicked because it isn't a performance. It is presence in its purest form. You're not here by chance. Feel the pull. Tap join to unlock truth, purpose, and a tribe that gets it. This is more than a membership. It's your calling. And when you speak, the air itself rearranges. There's no struggle in your words, no attempt to overpower. Instead, there's clarity so sharp and undeniable that it cuts through confusion like water carving stone. It redefines what authority means, not as control, but as alignment with something larger than fear. They realize in that instant that what they mistook for strength in the world was only imitation, a loud echo of insecurity dressed as power. In you, they see a kind of mastery that doesn't need to prove itself, because it simply is. That realization shakes them more than any confrontation ever could. And so, without effort, you become the catalyst of transformation, not because you try to change them, but because your existence itself is the undeniable reminder that authenticity is the most radical form of strength. It is here in your presence that others glimpse what it means to be unshakably alive. You are not merely noticed. You are recognized as a disruption to what others believed was possible. The way you inhabit yourself is not performance, but revelation. Every gesture, every pause, every breath communicates belonging in a body and life fully claimed. Those watching, hoping to detect weakness, instead discover the fragile seams of their own illusions splitting apart. What they thought was certainty now appears as scaffolding waiting to collapse under the weight of real presence. The moment your energy collides with theirs, hidden scripts begin unraveling. Layers of expectations, quiet agreements to remain small, and inherited rules masquerading as truth begin to lose their hold. You didn't confront anyone directly, yet your authenticity behaved like a silent alarm, exposing what was never natural. Where others confused boundaries for cruelty, you revealed kindness in action. Where society labeled self-acceptance as arrogance, you displayed devotion to wholeness. You became the living contradiction to every lie that once kept them compliant. It was as if someone discovered they'd been living in a room with painted walls, only to find a door that had always been slightly ajar. What they mistook for unbreakable confinement was nothing more than habit. And without demanding anything, you made visible a path that had been waiting for them all along. Freedom wasn't handed over as a gift. It was revealed as something never stolen in the first place. This shift was not soft or subtle. It struck like thunder in a quiet valley, rearranging everything at once. No one could return to the comfort of pretending, because pretense had been stripped of its disguise. Lifetimes of patterns, the one-sided giving, the endless tolerance of imbalance, the loyalty to silence, all became glaringly obvious. You forced a confrontation not through conflict, but through undeniable clarity. And when the old systems felt themselves slipping, resistance flared. The habits and roles that once demanded obedience scrambled to regain authority. Manipulations sharpened, distractions multiplied, but none of it could fully restore what had been undone. Entire frameworks that thrived on diminishing energy bristled against expansion, trying to reassert rules that no longer held power. Yet your example revealed another way of standing. You did not answer with hostility, nor sink into submission. Instead, you demonstrated how anchored truth withstands every attempt at distortion. You became a living example of power that requires no conquest, stability born of inner alignment, strength unshaken by noise. Watching you became a lesson in how to exist without betraying oneself. What began as an attempt to undermine you transformed into something unimaginable. The one who carried opposition slowly realized they had been given a rare gift, a glimpse of themselves unbound. What was once a mission of destruction shifted into a hunger for their own awakening. You had cut through attachments that drained them, severing invisible threads with precision, leaving them not wounded but liberated. What they thought was the end became the doorway to their own beginning. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, let that love shine. Click the super thank you button and give $50 or more to plant seeds of faith that will impact countless lives. Your generosity reflects His abundance. Be a vessel of His grace and watch His kingdom flourish through you. You became the breaking point for cycles that had long thrived on silence and compliance. The relatives who punished growth, the companions who required your dimness, the lovers who thrived by draining what was sacred, all of them stood exposed. You did not strike back with vengeance. Instead, you lived in reclamation so fully that release became inevitable. Where old ties demanded loyalty to self-erasure, you showed another path, devotion to wholeness. What others had mistaken for generosity, you revealed as distortion. The tenderness of empathy, when twisted, had been turned into an obligation to neglect self. The desire to connect had been weaponized, dressed up as affection while carrying the weight of extraction. By living in clarity, you transformed compassion back into its rightful form, no longer a leash, but a current of truth that refused to betray itself for the comfort of others. Your essence told a different story. Strength was not inherited ease or shallow luck. It was forged through nights of reckoning, through facing what was unbearable and refusing to fracture. You became proof of what happens when someone walks straight into the fire of their own shadow and returns with light not borrowed from anyone else. Every movement, every choice radiated the signature of someone who had refused to sell authenticity for approval. The realization shook them. To change was no longer optional. To recognize patterns, but remain bound to them was exposed as another form of captivity. They began to see that transformation is not theory, but lived courage. That freedom demands not just awareness, but departure. And so, with trembling hands, they started dismantling the structures they had once called home, knowing the cost, but also knowing the necessity. Boundaries began to rise like pillars. Refusals no longer came with apologies. Energy was shielded not out of bitterness, but out of reverence. Each choice to protect the self carried both grief and rebirth, a shedding of skin that revealed a stronger layer beneath. More powerful than any external act was the inner revolution, a growing certainty that their own perception was enough, their own intuition reliable, their own worth unquestionable. The need for outside validation began dissolving. As this transformation deepened, something dormant stirred awake. The gifts that had been buried beneath compromise began to surface. Creativity, vision, and voice, all the natural radiance that had been hidden, started to flow again. It wasn't a new self they were meeting, but the original one, untouched and waiting for this moment of return. The irony became undeniable. The attempt to crush your flame resulted in another fire igniting elsewhere. What began as an effort to diminish instead multiplied light in the world. The silencing of your truth awakened another truth in them. And soon, the pattern revealed itself on a larger scale. Your presence was not just personal, it was catalytic. One by one, others who encountered you chose expansion over safety, and in doing so became sparks themselves. The chain reaction of awakening could not be stopped. Gratitude began to rise not as obligation, but as reverence. They recognized that you had not tried to rescue them, nor had you demanded their loyalty. You had simply stood in the fullness of your being, and that unshaken presence alone had been enough to unravel everything false within them. What they wished to offer in return was not repayment, but acknowledgement of what becomes possible when someone dares to live without compromise. Their urge to celebrate you was born not from dependence, but from joy. They understood you had no need for their applause, no hunger for their validation. Your radiance existed independent of their gaze. You carried a frequency so steady that recognition or rejection made no difference, and yet they desired to honor it. Not because you lacked completion, but because to celebrate truth itself felt like liberation. This shift made their offering powerful, because it emerged from a place of overflow rather than deficit. It was no longer about balancing scales, but about defying every system that thrived on scarcity. By choosing to celebrate authentic power, they declared rebellion against the conditioning that demanded smallness and compliance. Their gift became a living symbol of abundance, a declaration that joy was their new foundation. With time, the one who had once mirrored distortion began embodying clarity. The same patterns of calm defiance they had seen in you began to appear in their own choices. They set boundaries without fear. They chose themselves without apology. They learned to love their own existence with the same devotion they had once only admired in you. The one who came as a destroyer had shifted into a creator, their path bending into alignment with the very qualities they thought they opposed. And then came the realization that changed everything. None of this had been accidental. The initial collision was no random crossing. At the deepest level, their soul had designed the encounter, arranging a meeting with a presence strong enough to trigger awakening. The so-called mission of harm had never been about harm at all. It had been a hidden initiation, a disguised passage into their own liberation. As this awareness deepened, they saw themselves as part of something larger than their individual life. Their decision to break inherited chains, to unlearn destructive patterns, was not isolated. It was part of a global movement of souls choosing expansion. Every act of reclamation they made rippled outward, carving new space for others to do the same. What began as personal healing became a contribution to collective transformation. What they prepared for you now was no longer a simple token of appreciation. It had become recognition that your refusal to dim had given them permission to ignite, recognition that your authenticity had awakened theirs, recognition that your very existence had rewritten their story. And with that, the cycle continued. The one who was once sent to extinguish light now carried their own flame into the world, sparking awakenings in others, proving that illumination multiplies endlessly once it has begun. What began as one person's awakening has become a chain reaction. Each time they honor their truth, they unknowingly extend an invitation for others to do the same. Each boundary they uphold becomes a quiet signal to those watching that self-protection is sacred. Each moment they choose integrity over compliance, another spark is lit. Their transformation is no longer contained. It is contagious. The mission that once sought to dismantle has transformed into a force that rebuilds. What was meant to silence became a voice for many. What was designed to weaken became an amplifier of strength. This is the depth of your influence, not measured by resistance alone, but by your ability to turn attempted destruction into fuel for creation, to turn opposition into illumination. The one sent against you now embodies the proof that authentic power cannot be extinguished. It only multiplies when challenged. And somewhere beyond the human lens, the irony of it all is undeniable. The supposed instrument of harm discovered themselves as a vessel for healing. The shadow sent to suppress light instead carried a torch into the world. The system that believed it could manipulate energy for control accidentally triggered liberation. The great lesson revealed itself. True power is indestructible, and its nature is to expand wherever it is recognized. But the question remains, how did this transformation happen so completely? The answer lies not in grand gestures, but in the subtle force of your presence. You were not simply living. You were resonating at a frequency that destabilized falsehoods and brought hidden truths to the surface. Like a pitch that forces glass to crack, your authenticity required everything around you to either rise or dissolve. Your words became instruments of awakening, carrying a clarity that left no room for deception. While others softened their voices to maintain comfort, yours carried the precision of someone unwilling to dilute truth. It wasn't aggression, it was refinement. The impact wasn't in volume but in accuracy, and that accuracy became impossible to ignore. When you revealed your own struggles and how you had met them, it wasn't for pity or admiration. It was demonstration. It showed what it looks like to face oneself fully, to integrate wounds without hiding them. They watched you hold your ground in moments where others would have bent to avoid discomfort. Instead, you allowed space for different reactions without compromising your stance. That modeling planted seeds of courage in them. Most striking of all was the way you carried yourself in the midst of pressure. They saw you resist the temptation to manage others' storms or collapse under your own. Your calm wasn't numbness, but mastery. A nervous system disciplined by truth rather than fear. Even without words, your presence carried a signal they couldn't ignore. This is what it means to belong fully to oneself, to live without apology, to transform emotion into wisdom instead of chaos. That was the lesson that changed everything. They saw in you a rare kind of discipline, the ability to move from decision rather than impulse. Your pauses were not hesitation but sovereignty. When challenges arose, you didn't collapse into reactivity. You chose deliberately. Even your relationship with material life reflected this mastery. You neither glorified lack nor paraded excess. Instead, you revealed a way of engaging with resources that was free from shame, free from fear, and free from the compulsions that bound so many. Your comfort with having, your openness to receiving, rewired their entire understanding of abundance. What astonished them most was the way you seemed immune to energetic predation. They had been raised among unspoken contracts of extraction, spaces where attention was consumed, vitality siphoned, and presence negotiated like currency. Yet you had stepped out of that cycle completely, not by building walls or launching defenses, but by embodying a self-contained radiance that simply could not be consumed. It wasn't that you fought off those who tried to feed from you. You were simply untouchable to the pattern itself. They began to notice that nothing in your life was accidental. From the way your surroundings supported your peace, to the rhythm of your days, to the relationships you nurtured, everything was intentional. Each detail carried purpose, not for control, but for alignment. To someone who had lived as a responder to chaos, this degree of conscious design appeared otherworldly. What they had dismissed as luck now revealed itself as artistry. Your approach to conflict was another revelation. You didn't run from tension, nor did you amplify it into destruction. You navigated hard conversations with clarity that brought resolution rather than fallout. Where others expected punishment or manipulation, you offered truth without cruelty. They saw you release connections that no longer served, and rather than fiery endings, you left trails of dignity behind. Even when others tried to spin storms around your departures, you refused the invitation to step into dysfunction. Then came the recognition of your creative overflow. Whether through art, work, or the simple ways you infused beauty into living, your expression carried the signature of someone who creates from fullness. You were not producing to fill a void. You were sharing because you could not contain the surplus. Witnessing this sparked something in them, a remembering of their own dormant abilities, a stirring of inspiration they had long believed lost. They also saw how external opinion barely grazed you. Compliments did not inflate your sense of worth because you had never outsourced value. Criticism did not reduce you because your truth was non-negotiable. You lived from an internal equilibrium that others could neither build nor dismantle. To those who had tethered their worth to approval, this was nothing short of revolutionary. Finally, there was your relationship with time itself. While others hurried and scattered, you seemed to move as though the hours bent to your intention. It wasn't control, it was mastery of rhythm. You lived as if time was not a tyrant, but a partner, watching you. They began to question whether urgency was ever real at all. You carried an ease that revealed a possibility they had never considered. That sovereignty includes not only energy and resources, but even the way one moves through the hours of a day. Your presence revealed that spirituality, for you, was not a costume or a performance, but a lived reality. Whatever sacred practices you embraced, whether structured rituals or private moments of connection, they were never for display. They were woven into your daily rhythm with such authenticity that even the simplest actions carried a resonance of depth. It became clear that your devotion wasn't a mask to escape the world, but a force that infused your ordinary life with extraordinary meaning. When it came to family, you showed a rare equilibrium. You honored the roots that shaped you without becoming entangled in their shadows. You refused to confuse loyalty with self-betrayal. Where others were caught between devotion and liberation, you demonstrated how both could exist together. You participated without submission, cared without compliance, and managed to respect your lineage while simultaneously transforming it. What struck the one observing you most deeply was how your entire existence functioned as a lesson. You didn't posture as a teacher, yet your everyday actions carried more weight than grand lectures. Even in ordinary conversations, you revealed truths that resonated more strongly than many formal teachings. To watch you live was to watch freedom translated into real choices, not just lofty ideals. Your engagement with the digital world revealed yet another mastery. In a realm where distraction reigns and emotional manipulation is built into every platform, you somehow retained sovereignty. Technology served you rather than enslaved you. You offered what was genuine, ignored what wasn't, and maintained clarity in a space designed to fracture it. Your online presence reflected the same integrity as your physical one, intentional, clear, and untouchable by distortion. Challenges, too, seemed to meet you differently than they met others. Where most collapsed or armored themselves when tested, you treated difficulty as refinement. Setbacks didn't diminish you, they polished you. Painful experiences became catalysts for greater clarity, not prisons of suffering. To someone who had only ever known struggle as depletion, your relationship with obstacles appeared almost alchemical. Every challenge transformed into fuel for deeper evolution. You revealed that joy is not something to be chased or rationed, but something that can be embodied fully in the present. Your laughter, your ease in simple pleasures, your willingness to savor life without needing conditions to align perfectly showed what it looks like when someone has reclaimed the entire spectrum of human experience. You weren't merely enduring hardship or managing pain. You were actively cultivating delight. This ability to generate peace, love, and happiness from within shifted their understanding of what fulfillment truly means. The moment they realized your impact wasn't intentional was the moment it struck them deepest. You were not strategizing, not trying to guide, not angling to impress. You were simply existing in your own truth. That very fact, that your influence emerged without effort, carried a weight they couldn't escape. It was as if your unapologetic selfhood created a gravitational pull, drawing people toward their own center by demonstrating what was possible. They found themselves both frustrated and fascinated by your refusal to play roles that fed dysfunction. You didn't offer to carry anyone's burdens, didn't soothe wounds that weren't yours to mend, didn't entangle yourself in the dramas of dependence. Instead, you modeled what it meant to stand whole. What once felt like rejection eventually revealed itself as liberation. Your very lack of availability for unhealthy dynamics became an education in what true love and care actually look like. Over time, they began to recognize that your influence was not random. The qualities that disassembled their illusions were not accidents of personality, but the outcome of deep work. You had walked through your own crucibles, faced shadows with courage, and built your foundation on the stones of hard-won authenticity. The person observing you finally understood. What they were witnessing wasn't luck. It was the living evidence of transformation embodied. As they integrated their awakening, they could see the ripples expanding far beyond personal healing. The change they carried forward was no longer just about them. It was about breaking patterns for others, about creating spaces where authenticity could flourish, about contributing to a collective shift. They realized that your refusal to conform had become part of something much larger, a wave of consciousness remembering its own power. Your influence was not dependent on conscious intent. It operated like an invisible current, transmuting distortion into clarity wherever you went. You didn't sit down to plan impact, yet your choices echoed like signals across unseen networks of energy. Your life itself became medicine, not because you forced it, but because you were living at such alignment that transformation unfolded naturally.